Hey. All right, so you can see a slide that says, yo, show and tell, right?
Yeah.
You're saying, so we're going to have to take your word for it. I think we're just going to say next slide instead of ring our small makeshift gong, because it's really loud here. All right, so what's going to happen is I'm going to kind of talk about my background, my journey, and how I got to where I am today. Jen's going to do the same, and then we'll talk to you guys about our creative collective of freelancers called Ghostly Ferns. All right, so let's get going. Next slide. All right, hi, I am Meg Lewis. I am a graphic designer living and working currently in Brooklyn with Jen. And if you go to the next slide, you would normally see a delightful GIF of my work, but since we're looking at a PDF now, you can only see the first slide of the GIF. And so normally I'd let you look at my work and judge me and decide whether or not you think I'm worthy or not, but now you'll just kind of have to take my word for it. I am a graphic designer working as a brand designer, a UI designer, a website designer. I do all kinds of types of design, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So move on to the next slide. All right, so I went to college specifically to become a freelancer. I knew when I was younger that I wanted to be a freelancer because I never wanted anyone to ever tell me what to do, and I didn't want to have to follow any rules. And I just wanted to work for myself so that I can buzz off and see a movie in the middle of the day whenever I want. So I went to college and I mixed my own major. I majored in graphic design combined with web development. And at the time, when I was in school, you never mix the two together, and I thought that was super strange, so I made my own major and did that. And I decided to become a freelancer. And so while I was in school, I didn't want to waste time with anything other than trying to become a freelancer. So I started working basically for free while I was in college, living off of student loans while I was trying to become a freelancer. So if you go to the next slide, you can see exactly what I was dealing with at the time. On the left is Ghostly Ferns' first website that I created while I was in college, while I was a working freelancer. And as you can see, my work was awful. So if you're any bit better than that work, then you're already way ahead of where I was. On the right is my first ever paying client project, which was for a photography studio. It was right when people were discovering chalkboards. And and as you see, luckily that's come and gone. But as you can tell, my work was meh. It was fine, whatever. But I was actually working as a freelancer, and I was starting eventually to get clients pay me. And the site on the upper right-hand corner that I designed was my first ever paying gig. And I got $500 to design and code that whole website, which is not very much today, but for me at the time, it was like amazing. So I started getting more and more work from clients, more people paying me $500 or sometimes less, sometimes nothing. And I was really just living off of those delicious government student loans at the time. And now I'm still paying them off, but whatever, it was great. And so once I graduated from school, I actually didn't even graduate. I just decided to not come back one day because I was freelancing and I was doing exactly what I wanted to do. And it was pretty cool. So if you move on to the next slide, this is sort of my creative career journey. So I graduated or left school in 2009, and I wanted to become a web designer. And I wanted to become a freelance web designer that specifically sort of was working on e-commerce shops. So I did exactly that. And I started doing that for a couple of years until I moved to New York. And then once I got to New York, I started doing more UI design because I was working with startups. And startups in New York generally are hiring like crazy for UI designers. It's super easy to get work as a UI designer living in New York and probably San Francisco too. So I started working more as a UI designer. And as I did that for a couple of years, I realized that I had really become a UX designer because as somebody who designs UI, a lot of times you end up solving all of these UX problems. And one day I realized, oh shoot, I'm actually doing more UX than anything else. So I was loving that and doing that for a while until one day I looked at my portfolio and realized that everyone was hiring me for brand design. And I noticed that my portfolio was just completely full of brand design. And I didn't even realize that I had become a brand designer. So then I was like, okay, cool. I guess I'm a brand designer now. And then as I got more into brand design and designing logos and identities, I got really into the strategy side. So I became a brand strategist really naturally, and I really enjoyed that. And so I've kind of come on this journey of doing all of these different things and being a specialist in all of these areas. And today, I sort of like doing them all. And that's exactly what I'm doing. So every project for me is completely different. Some days I'll be focusing on UI, UX. Some days I'll be designing brands. Some days I will be seeing a movie in the middle of the day. It just really depends. And I think that's really cool. But what I like to call myself is a value-based designer, because most designers like to think of them as sort of like a skill-based designer, a specialist in a specific kind of skill. Most people will say, oh, I'm a UI designer, or oh, I'm a brand designer, blah, blah, blah. I don't like to do that because I like to kind of do all types of designs. Rather, I design for companies that have specific values. And if you go to the next slide, I work for something that I made up, a complete new term. I just coined the phrase happy companies. So I work for what I call our happy companies. And a happy company to me is any company who's working to make the world a healthier or a happier place. And that can be through their product or their service, or it can just be through their company culture. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see a bunch of examples of what I think are really, really, really happy companies. And I think I always give MailChimp as the first example because they're the happiest of companies that has a super boring product. So email marketing, newsletter templates are so boring. They're not cool, they're not sexy, they're not fun, and they're certainly not happy. But MailChimp is such a happy company. They are constantly doing things to support the design community. They're doing things to support their home city of Atlanta. They are doing amazing things for all types of local communities, and it's really, really great. And they also have really personable, clean, and friendly design. And they use that through illustration, through releasing products of their own, yada, yada, yada. Cards Against Humanity is a really great example of a happy company to me because the company itself is pretty much a douchebag. They're horrible, they're mean, and they're constantly making fun of themselves. But they're poking fun at the world. And if you've ever played Cards Against Humanity with your relatives that are super conservative or maybe not really the types of people that have a sense of humor, it really brings out that weird person inside of everyone, and I love that about them. BarkBox is making the world healthier and happier for dogs. And then the one in the middle, the guy with the weights on top of the other dude's head, that's Headspace, which is a mental health and wellness app. And just like a lot of mental health apps right now, they are using a lot of illustrations and really friendly design to make this heavy, heavy topic seem really lighthearted and fun. All right, so go to the next slide. This is the type of design that people hire me for. They hire me to design for positivity and generally for happiness. So I specialize in work that, if you look on the next slide, you can see some more examples of my work. I specialize in things that make people happy. And the way that I do this is I think back to when we were children and the types of things as we were infants that we grew to love, and that really inspired us and made us excited about visual stimulation. So that happens a lot with shapes, with colors, with seeing smiles, with seeing faces, and with seeing characters. And so I bring out those things that you saw when you were a child and when you were an infant, and I pull that into product design and into brands, because that's really what forms a happy company, is sort of a friendly design that makes people feel positive when they ingest it. All right, so that's it for me. I will talk more about my journey afterwards, which was starting Ghostly Ferns and how that all worked. But first, we'll have Jen introduce herself.
Cool. So up on the next slide, just big heart because I think you guys seem cool. If you go to the next slide, this is me. I'm Jen Mussari. Definitely let's be friends on the internet. I think friendship is the best. I think the internet is a super great way to connect with potential friends. So the next slide also would have been a gift, just of rotating work. But basically what I do now is I'm a specialist designer. I come from a background of fine arts and ended up slowly honing the work that I was doing and slowly pulling extra pieces out of my portfolio to create a portfolio that was just lettering. So now I consider myself a lettering artist. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that I use a lot of traditional tools to create the work that I do. So the work that I do ends up looking very varied, and yet it all almost always comes from a pretty typical set of tools. And then if you go to the next slide, you'll see that I just have a massive pile of drawings all the time. So this is kind of what my life and my brain looks like. And if they were animated, you'd see that there's even more coming on top. And I just need to find a way to organize it. My life's chaotic. But anyway, go to the next slide. However, if that's what my real life looks like, this is what my work looks like once it goes out into the world. So it might end up being work that I do for myself for fun, which is like the Death Before Decaf t-shirt. This ended up being a collaboration with a small business called Cotton Bureau, which is a great outlet for designers' work. If you're looking for a little bit of passive income, it's really fun. It's a little competitive also. Or it could end up going for a client, which is like the It's All Gonna Be Okay t-shirt. That was a design done for the Art Directors Club. And so my work lives like somewhere between fun work for myself and fun work for clients. And if you go to the next slide, this would have been a GIF. Now it just looks like a bunch of cars, but we'll just skip this and go to the next one. The previous slide was a commercial, and it was done for the Lincoln Motor Company, which to me was like a dream client. And I grew up surrounded by cars and motorcycles, and so being able to now share my work with these large motor companies is really cool and very exciting. And it also, these larger clients gave me a bigger platform for my work to live. So the commercial that would have just been shown was for the Lincoln Motor Company, and it was shown at the Grammys a few years ago in front of 28 million people, which on my own, I could never gather 28 million people to like look at something I drew. So it's pretty cool, and I love the idea of collaborating always with a client. But sometimes the best collaborations actually comes from friendships that you make first. So this project here where I'm painting a motorcycle tank is something that I've always wanted to do. My friend Terrace, he's a product designer, and I didn't know this, but he also just builds motorcycles for fun. We were friends through product design, but once he told me that he had a client called Belstaff who wanted him to build some motorcycles, he knew that I could paint, and so he pulled me in on for this project, which was like a dream project. And I definitely wouldn't have worked on this if it weren't for just being friends with him. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see what it looks like finished with his touch. This is like, to me, one of the best things that could happen for my work. It's a collaboration with my friend Terrace. He built the motorcycle, but then also he brought his friend Ryan, who's a fantastic photographer, on to take this beautiful photograph. And now it's become a full image with 3 different people's hands on it, representing a brand that gives us the money to be able to do this project. So if you go to the next slide, really, if there's one thing I believe in, it's that throughout all of the work that you do and all of the pursuits that you go forth into, if you're going into it with a really genuine personality and looking for kind of true connection, you will find success, and success will come to you. So through it all, I know it's tough because a lot of people are like, you gotta network and you gotta get yourself out there. But through it all, even if you go to these networking events and you end up feeling kind of awkward, you're looking for the other awkward person to make friends with, it's gonna be good for you. So make friends and not contacts. And that's kind of how I came through to meet Meg. Meg is someone whose work I always admired, and as soon as she came into the collaborative studio that I worked in, we were like, oh, this is awesome. And we admired each other's work, worked back and forth. And then there came a chance for me to join up with the company that she was creating.
All right, so let's move on to the next slide. Let's talk about Ghostly Ferns. Ghostly Ferns is a company that technically I started by myself. When I was in college and I had no idea what I was doing, I thought I might sound a little bit more like I knew what I was doing if I went by a professional-ish sounding name. So I called myself Ghostly Ferns because, you know, kind of it sounds like maybe somebody else other than just me was behind it. So I said, okay, I'm Ghostly Ferns. Here we go. I'm going to be a freelancer. And my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, he was also he's also sitting right there next to us. But he was also getting started as a graphic designer. And so he kind of joined naturally, and we became this really cute couple design duo. Until we moved to New York, we joined a space called Studio Mates. And we really started to kind of be around other creative people all of the time, and we were constantly being inspired by them. And so Jen was actually at Studio Mates when I joined, and like she said, I admired her work, and I became a huge Jen fan. And inadvertently, I was always seeing her work around me because we were sitting near each other. And I knew that she was really awesome and she was really good to work with clients. And so we decided to make it official. And so we brought Jen on and as a sort of a partner. And then we eventually brought another friend on and then another friend on. So if you go to the next slide, this group of 5 people is Ghostly Ferns today. And as you can see, we kind of all have our own sort of generalized specialty. I'm a designer. Laura is our amazing illustrator. We have Brad, who does our product design. Jen does our hand lettering. And then Corey is our developer. And so I'm going to kind of talk to you all about generally how it works from a legal standpoint, as well as introduce all of the people in Ghostly Ferns individually. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see a bunch of logos. And I'm not showing you logos to show you how special we are. It has nothing to do with that. It's actually just to show you that we're legit, because everything else we're about to show you is going to make us seem like we're incredibly unprofessional. So these logos are clients that we've worked for collectively. And it's important to know that people who don't really know what they're doing, who are figuring it out as they go, people who take their work really lightheartedly and have a really good time can still do awesome work for really important businesses. So let's kind of go through and introduce each of the Ghostly Ferns. So if you go on to the next slide, you'll see Laura.
Yeah, and Laura's actually from the UK. She's fantastic, and we all love her. If you ever met her, she's literally the most delightful person you will ever find in the world. So Laura is great because she has a tact for digital illustration that is just, to me, unparalleled. And I love sitting next to her as someone who works in such a traditional method to be influenced by her design taste and her illustration style. So she does all of her work in Illustrator. She's insanely fast, and it's amazing to watch her work.
All right, go to the next slide. You'll see Brad.
Yeah, Brad is our product designer / awesome guy, and he does a lot of mobile design. He works on larger projects for the most part. So whereas Laura and someone like me might work on smaller, fast-paced illustration style projects, Brad is always working on a bigger project that lasts for a much longer time.
If you go to the next slide, you'll see Jen. So I don't want to make Jen have to talk about herself, but I think it's really important to be able to see more of Jen's work because it's so incredible. All right, but you already know what Jen does, so we'll move on. Corey, next slide.
Yeah, and Corey's the latest addition to Ghostly Ferns. So he moved to New York from Charleston about 6 months ago, and he's a developer. So if you look at our skill sets, Meg can design a website, Brad can design an app, I can do some branding, Meg can do some branding, Laura can do some branding and some page design. But together, we still can't quite make a full thing until Corey comes in and makes it work from the back end. So he is able to develop the websites that we often build or design.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. Let's talk about how it legally works and how the actual structure is for sort of creating a group like ours, because we're all just freelancers and we generally really wholeheartedly love being freelancers. We like all being independent. We like setting our own schedule. It's really great. We don't want to have a boss. So the legal structure was super important to us because we don't want to have to be specifically tied or employed by a company. It's really important to us. So go to the next slide. You'll see the actual legal structure. So right now, and how it's always been up until this point, is that I am the legal owner, and I have a single member LLC for the company. And a single member LLC is the same type of entity that you would get yourself if you're just a regular freelancer. It kind of protects you from any sort of legal claims, and it gives you a business name rather than just invoicing your clients to your specific name and giving them your social security number. So a single member LLC is a really low price way to make yourself seem pretty much like a legit company. Mm-hmm. So from there, Ghostly Ferns simply hires out everybody else as a contractor. And the reason why that is really great for us is because that way I don't have to have any employees, which I don't want. I don't want to be somebody's boss. And this way they remain freelancers and they can do whatever they want and they don't have anybody telling them what to do. So this way we have a little bit more of a legal freedom to kind of arrange each contract with each client differently, and we can kind of pick and choose people for every project, and it works out really nicely. So if you go to the next slide, this is like a progression of slides here. Okay, just why don't you skip a couple of slides until I changed it to Danny DeVito because I wish so badly that he contacts us someday. So if you go to that first scenario that's highlighted, which happens the most frequently, number 1. So the thing that usually happens is that Danny DeVito or whoever will contact the freelancer that they want to work with specifically. So a lot of times people will know that they need hand lettering, so they will contact Jen directly to do hand lettering. So that happens the most often. If you go to the next slide, number 2, which happens pretty often, is that a company, or hopefully Danny DeVito, will contact Ghostly Ferns, our group inbox, and then Danny will say, hey, I need somebody to help me with my brand. Oh my God, that's a dream project.
My brand!
He'll say, hey, I need somebody to help me with my brand. I don't know who, help. And then we'll divvy the project out from there. And then the next slide, the third way, which happens pretty infrequently, is that Danny would contact Ghostly Ferns and say, hey, I want to work with all of you. And so then he hires us as a group. And this is sort of a dream scenario for us to be able to work together as a huge group all of the time, but we're not really an agency, so that doesn't really happen very often. If you go to the next slide, we're going back to those logos. You can see this is the real life application of the letters above each logo is showing the name of the person who worked on that project. And as you can see, most of the time it's one person, but every so often we're able to work as a partnership with a client, and then sometimes we get to work as a group. But usually we're freelancers, so usually we're working alone on that client project. So the next slide is just, we are not an agency. A lot of people think of us as an agency. We were nominated for Agency of the Year last year, which is hilarious to all of us. We definitely are so far from an agency. But we actually do work with a lot of agencies. And agencies like to hire us because sometimes they'll be working on a project and they need an extra set of hands. So they'll reach out to us and grab 1 or 2 of us to help them with the project. So although we are not an agency, we do work with agencies a lot. And it's really cool and really fun.
This gives us a lot of freedom also individually to take the jobs that we want to take and maybe turn down jobs that we don't want to take.
Yeah, so if you go on to the next slide, you can see our haunted attic.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite places, and basically what happened was we had a large group of friends at our previous studio called Studio Mates, and we were located in a neighborhood of Brooklyn that was very quickly developing and basically turning into a tiny San Francisco. And so our crappy building that was still hiring out artist studios at the price of an artist studio. Oh, we got a weird sound. Do you guys hear that?
Yeah.
It's a ghost.
It's a poltergeist. That's exciting.
That is exciting.
They're communicating.
It's the ghost of our old studio. Anyway, we got evicted. We got evicted from our studio, and we were like, we have to find a better home for ourselves. That studio was fun, but it was also felt like camping a little bit because we didn't have running water, we didn't have anything. And so our friends and I, we are about 20-some freelancers, 20 to 25 freelancers, all working in a townhouse now in a neighborhood called Gowanus. And so we share 5 floors of townhouse. And then up at the very top is the haunted attic. So Ghostly Ferns and I reside up here. And we love our little studio. It is cute. We've got a little pitched roof. And it's just the best place that I could possibly think to do the work that I do when I prefer to work kind of at odd hours.
All right, so let's go on to the next slide. I just want to kind of highlight the benefits of working in a group like Ghostly Ferns because we love what we do so much and we love our group. And we want to do anything that we can to inspire other people to become freelancers and to band together and to form a super, super awesome team. All right, so at Ghostly Ferns specifically, we are friends first, and then we're coworkers second. Rather than people who have a wonderful work situation that like to hang out with their coworkers, we're not like that. We were actually best friends before we banded together. And that's really important to us because friendship is at the heart of everything that we do. And it's the reason why other people try to form groups like Ghostly Ferns and they come at it from too serious of a business standpoint. And then it fails because they can't get their business act together. But for us, we genuinely trust each other wholeheartedly. And so it makes our arrangement really amazing. And people are constantly asking us, like, it can't be that great. What is the downside? And we really can never tell anyone anything because it's so great. So if you move on to the next slide, the important thing for all of us is that we give to each other just as much as we receive from one another. Because I'm not able to do hand lettering, I'm not able to code a website anymore. I don't want to do those things because I'm not good at it and I don't enjoy it. And because I have Jen, because I have Corey and Brad and Laura on the team, I don't have to do the things I don't like to do. I can just have fun all the time, and all of the things I don't want to do, I can simply pass off to them because they actually enjoy it. So, whereas if you go to the next slide, on the left hand is me trying to do hand lettering, which is horrible. I don't ever draw anything. I can't sketch at all. It looks terrible. I don't have fun doing it. And on the right hand side is Jen's version of the same thing. As you can see, clearly polished. She looks like she enjoyed it. She looks like she knows what she's doing. And it's all around good. And the great thing about this is that if a client comes to me and hires me for brand design, and I decide for my client that a hand-lettered custom logo would be best, I can just pull Jen aside and have her work on that. I don't have to try to make something that's going to look really bad. And in Jen's case, like a client will come to her for hand lettering, and then they might end up needing a website, and so then she can pull me aside. And it's really great, that arrangement.
Yeah, I couldn't design a website if my life depended on it. I mean, I could, but it would look really bad. And so having Meg and Brad and Corey and Laura to extend my skill set really empowers me to take on jobs that I might be intimidated to take on my own, since I do consider myself a specialist. Whereas someone like Meg is more able to take on a full brand, whereas I feel more confident taking on certain details.
Exactly. So let's move on to the next slide. So a huge important factor to us, and I think to all freelancers, is that we can really just work whenever we want, and we like it that way. So if you go to the next slide, I kind of wrote down each of our work schedules. So I don't really have a regular schedule. These days, I like working as little as possible, and it's pretty great. I realized that if I can get like 3-ish hours of completely uninterrupted work time, I get inside of the computer and I do so much work. I can do the same amount of work that most people who are distracted by the internet and other things do in 2 days. If I can just get 3 hours of complete Meg time inside of the computer. So the rest of the day, I buzz off and I do whatever I want, and it's amazing. And some days I don't work at all because I don't feel like it. It's awesome. Laura, I didn't even know how to describe how much she works or what hours. She like kind of just works whenever she wants. She works a lot sometimes if she has deadlines. Sometimes she takes a week off. It doesn't matter. It's why we love being freelancers. Brad is our serious businessman. He works like pretty regular hours. It's pretty great, but he still is a freelancer and he still does whatever he wants. So he usually gets in around 11 a.m. and leaves around 6 p.m. or whenever he gets hungry.
Yeah, I mean, and then I'm super different. I prefer to work a long time and be distracted because I love Twitter and I love reading it while I'm working. And I admit that to myself. I'm like, I work better when I have input from other sources, so I'll prefer to work for long stretches. Late into the night, I like to wake up between 10 and 11. I like to say that I'm on West Coast time, but never on the West Coast. And that's just how I like it. I started to stop feeling bad about not being a morning person and just let myself roll with the circadian rhythm that I've got going. So I'll often work from 2 to 12, 2 to 2, 12 to 12, you know, whenever I like to do it.
And then Corey is our guy that has an actual part-time job. So Corey actually works for the Wall Street Journal part-time, Monday through Wednesday. So Corey works with us around Thursday, Friday, some weekends. He comes in whenever he wants to and leaves whenever he wants. And so this is exactly why we love our arrangement. We can do whatever we want. Mm-hmm. It's awesome.
We're like a bunch of stray cats. It's just kind of
We actually do have a colony of feral cats that lives behind our building. So
we do. Yeah,
it's relevant. Really all right, let's move on to the next slide. So at Ghostly Ferns, I really like the fact that because we're not an actual company, we have no reason to have a not safe for work policy, which means that we get to be as wildly inappropriate and weird as we want to be, or just as wildly inappropriate as a group of friends normally is. So if you go to the next slide, you can see examples of all of this. The left-hand side is we had an intern over the summer, and we made him explore for an entire day poop. And so that is a picture from his sketchbook of him exploring poop. And it got really weird and it got really awesome. In the middle is our company mascot for Ghostly Ferns. Her name is Flo. She's not holding 2 oranges. Those are her boobs. A lot of people think she's holding something. I think they're just in denial. And then on the right-hand side is a sticker that Laura made that I may or may not actually have tattooed on my butt.
He does.
Okay, let's go on to the next slide. So generally, I think it's really important to know that no one actually really knows what they're doing. I think when you're in school, you assume that everybody has their act figured out and they all know exactly what they're doing all of the time because people on the internet really make it seem that way. But at Ghostly Ferns, all of us individually and together as a group, we are just figuring it out as we go. And we're pretending like we know what we're doing along the way. And that's been really important for my career personally, is I've always had the facade that I know what I'm doing, but really I'm scrambling because I have no idea what's going on. And it's really important at Ghostly Ferns that we're figuring it out as we go, but we're figuring it out together as a group. We're making group decisions. And it's really great when you don't know what you're doing to have a lot of other people around you to help you figure that out, and you can help them figure it out too. And that's another reason why our situation is really awesome.
It's also very liberating to kind of own that also, instead of having to pretend like you know that you have it figured out and trying to convince yourself that you have it figured out. When you go into it with a more open mindset, you're also open to more opportunities that you may not fit into that story that you've created for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so move on to the next slide. Let's talk about what is next for Ghostly Ferns. So speed on over to the next slide.
And we have a shop! So this is really new for all of us. When I was in college, I made some screen print posters. Wow, bless you!
Whoa.
And that was really cool because at that time I had, bless you, some products that I could sell in order to make a living. But after that, after going through Etsy, I was like, I never want to make products again. It's just not for me. But then suddenly, I got to know Meg, and she has a history of having owned an online shop and having had lots of success and really enjoyed the process of it. And so recently we tried to discover what products done by a group, Ghostly Ferns, instead of an individual like myself, might look like. And so we came together and made some pins, these little enamel guys of our mascot Flo, some tote bags that are screen printed, and some custom patches, and also some really fun prints. And we're really excited about the potential now to kind of put ourselves out there and our brand out there in a way that's a little bit more accessible, and you can actually hold them. It's more tactile now for people who maybe want to get to know us a little bit better.
And if you move on to the next slide, we're also slowly transitioning into a multi-member LLC, which is really scary for us in our freelancer brains to join up as a multi-member company. And this just means that we're all finally going to be equal, because that's all we've ever wanted to be. Public facing, we like to be equal, but from a legal standpoint, as I showed you before, we're technically legally not equal. So we're actually working now to create this multi-member LLC, which means that all of our freelance income has to go to Ghostly Ferns before it comes to us. And that's really cool and really scary at the same time. And move on to the next slide. So we are slightly breaking apart and moving because me, Meg, and Brad, we are moving across the country to Minneapolis next month. And we are going to have to figure out how to make Ghostly Ferns work across the country. And it's going to be a really exciting challenge. I think nothing really will have to change about our arrangement because of how relaxed we are, but it's going to be really sad because we're not going to be in the same room together. And for anything, it'll just be sad because we're best friends, and it'll be sad not being around our friends anymore. But it's also really cool because it's giving us a chance to grow and to expand.
Mm-hmm. On the work side of things, we have a few tools that really help us do something like this with confidence. So we use Slack already a lot, even though we're all in the same room. Using Slack lets us communicate in a really great way. So now, if we're still communicating the same way with the same amount of frequency, then it should be good. We're still on top of things. Plus, I love the idea of being able to go to Minneapolis and see what Meg and Brad's life is like there and kind of have residencies there. We always love to travel at Ghostly Ferns. We always love to go out and experience other creative communities and other creative cities. So Minneapolis feels like a really great opportunity for us.
Cool. So the next slide is our last slide. That is it. That's all we have for you. So thank you so much.
Yay.
Do we have time for questions?
Yeah, of course.
Cool. Are our faces back?
Yes.
Cool.
Does anybody have questions?
I do. Why Minneapolis? What's going on?
Brad and I have moved so much all over the country, and we kind of always move because we just want to. We don't really have a specific reason other than that we really like the city and it just feels right. So we don't really have a specific huge reason, but we are excited about it, and it's an amazing, amazing place to be. We can't wait to be there. Anybody else?
Yeah. Do you guys have any good resources for starting up freelance in the business sides of being an LLC and figuring out your taxes, or is there any good way to figure all that out in an easy way?
Yeah, I mean, what you should definitely do is find a lawyer, and a great way to do that is probably by talking to your professors, because I'm sure that they have had or know someone who's had to form an LLC. If you know anyone in your community who has already done it, basically just find their lawyer, and that lawyer will help you through the entire process. They'll look up your name, they'll make sure that it's available, and they'll talk you through the process so that you're fully covered in doing that. I would also suggest looking for an accountant, unless you have a passion for accounting, of course. Taxes, now you're going to have to pay quarterly, which no one really told me in school. Hopefully your professors are really great about preparing you for that, if you want to be a freelancer, of course. Otherwise, if you're full-time employed somewhere else, it'll be different. So I have to pay taxes 4 times a year, which is like a little tough on me because I don't have an accounting brain. My accountant makes sure that I have all my W-2s and send out my 1099s in and good to go. So for me, basically what I'm saying is that outsourcing is really great. I also use an invoicing system that really helps me get my invoices sent out quickly and my clients organized. If you're someone who you can admit to yourself that you maybe aren't as organized as some other business types might be, which I'm definitely not, allowing yourself to kind of outsource these things will really make your life a lot easier.
When I first started freelancing, I thought I would never be a fancy enough person to hire a lawyer or an accountant, and I always tried to do everything myself. I used LegalZoom to form my first LLC, and it was super expensive and really confusing. And I ended up having to hire a lawyer to fix my LegalZoom LLC because they did a very questionable job. The lawyer was surprisingly inexpensive. My accountant is an accountant that specializes in freelancers, and she is so inexpensive, and it's not as scary and costly as you would think it would be. It's definitely worth it.
Plus, I feel like even if I do have to pay other people to do those things, it actually empowers me and gives me the time to do my own work. So that's that. Did you have any other questions as far as I don't know, did that help at all?
Yeah, that's a huge help. Thank you.
Cool, yeah. Any other thoughts or questions?
I'm sorry. I was the person that sneezed.
You had a great sneeze. You should never apologize.
Right.
Beautiful sneeze. Cool. Any other thoughts? I have a just random question. Do any of you think that you're going freelance, or do you have intentions to go freelance out of school? Or raise your hand if you do, I guess.
I think that I'm a little afraid of it, but it seems really cool, but also it seems really scary at the same time. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the best part, if that's your goal, is to go freelance, then finding a support system is really beneficial, even if it's on Twitter or on Dribble or amongst your peers right now. or even with like full-time people. It's really beneficial to have a group of people who believe in you. It's nice.
Yeah, that's always the first piece of advice, and the number one piece of advice that I like to give is that the coolest thing about our design industry is that we're not competitive at all. We're extremely close, tight-knit, and very supportive of one another. And having a community that you make yourself with other freelancers is going to be really helpful, because what freelancers like to do is they like to hand projects back and forth. So, for example, if I'm really busy and I can't take on any freelance work and all of these people are emailing me and I can't take on these projects, I ask them what they're looking for, and then I refer them to another freelancer that I know is available. And when I panic because I have no work, I reach out to my other freelancer friends and they hand me work. And so there's constantly that give and take thing with freelancers in the community, and it's so helpful. It's a lifesaver.
But I do feel like this thought also applies to if you're looking to find a job right out of school. Having a support system, making friends with people in your community already, but then also with people who may be a few years ahead of you is going to be really helpful in the same exact way, where if someone gets a job offer and it's not right for them, they're going to look to their friends or look to their nearest relative just with that. So yeah, I would say just stick together. It's really important. Cool.
All right. Thanks again so much.
Thank you.